This is Jason Marcus Torrent, author of the Conqueror of the Sun series. This is just going to be another personal recording. I guess initially about the few new images that I've done since last recording, commentary on that. But I'm kind of hoping to want to talk about some stuff not exactly related to the Conquer the Sun series after I get through these images, which probably shouldn't take too long, but we'll just see what I come up with in regards to talking about them. So this image is from Conquer the Sun, The Cursed Princess, which last time I showed a bunch of images from there, but I had to stop with the image that this scene's related to when Jace finds Deirdre having a gun in her hands. He takes it out of her hands and does not recognize the gun, so he figures it must be Haruna's, and then yells at her to come, and then so this is the image of her coming. I'm just thinking maybe I did show this, but in any case, it's kind of sets up the next couple of pictures, which I'm pretty sure I haven't shown because they weren't done yet. And then so once she comes up to Jason Deirdre, he's like, he tells them that, he just, got this gun out of Deirdre's hands, and where the fuck did this come from? And where was it? And she explains that it's hers and that it was strapped under the bed. And I kind of talked about that last time, so not too much to talk about here. This is to show it's hard to do this in kind of still images. Actually, this is my first attempt. There was a couple of times where people get slapped. It's kind of in the news right now. But anyways, it's kind of hard to show it, or at least this is my first attempt. His arm seems a bit stiff, but in any case, I think the idea gets across, though, that he's slapping her. I kind of try to do it so that, like, her face was more turned than her previous was, her eyes are closed, stuff like that. But then, this is showing Haruna kind of explaining and trying to, get on his good side and trying to make it look like not a bad thing. By saying that, explaining the story about, why she has a gun and where it came from. She talks about how her father gave her the gun, and then she asks this question of, do you remember the day we met? And, as he says, of course he does. And he says that because at the time, because Yuna was, I think, only 16 at the time when they met, because she was a young girl. I should just say, I haven't done a picture of, I've already designed his character, but her father is, well, he's dead at this point, so he was an IRF-SF colonel, Saotomi Shikusa, and so, especially being the SF, being still fanatical even after the IRF defeat, kind of trying to still do little operations here and there, and then so they basically come up with this plan to assassinate a Fighting Axis governor. And because, was young, and a girl, she might seem unassuming enough to get close to the Fighting Axis governor and kill him. And while she's telling this story, especially in the context of where, and again, I didn't plan it this way, it was again just kind of, well, what did the characters say in these situations? She, in the context of asking when they met, and he says, of course, because he's kind of, in that sense, he's, even though it's about to change, in a sense, he's relating that, I really fell in love with you, and I loved you a lot, and, that's why I married you, and then we had a kid, and stuff like that. But the other side of it that he would remember is, it's also the same day he lost his sister, Becca. So, even though, I said in the last recording, I don't know, the reason why she doesn't bring this up before, because she realizes that it's really, I think it would be really hard to argue kind of either way if it really is Haruna's fault or not her fault. But, I think you can understand Jason's position. It kind of doesn't even matter, and he's just wanting to blame somebody or anybody and everything, because that's what people usually do. And it's, it's a consequence of us being humans. We're not robots. We're gonna react emotionally. And you could talk about controlling your emotions and stuff like that. I would say, I don't know, I guess nobody's really advocating this, but you could just, the implication almost is that a true strong person can regulate all of the emotions at all times, no matter what. Which I think that's really ridiculous. And it's almost to say that your logic, cool side, which is definitely very important and good, is always right and always should be first, and is a superior, that should always win over emotional, petty emotional human emotions. And it's like, what? We're supposed to become robots? And that's a kind of cliche and stuff like that, and I get taking it to extreme, but even if people don't admit it, that's basically what, and even though it's not talked about, and if you do bring it up, they'll say it's an extreme, overblowing of the implication. But I don't think that's the case. I think that's, but by just stating in all these cases that stuff like this happens, that, if you were a quote strong person and didn't let your emotions affect you, then then you're the perfect human being. See, this is the angle that I really don't like about this concept about controlling your emotions. I mean, there's this, it's kind of, don't want to talk about it, but it's very appropriate to what I was talking about anyways, I guess. An incident in real life just happened, where they had the Oscar awards, which I don't really give a fuck about and haven't given a fuck about ever, basically. But Will Smith smacked this comedian, Chris Rock, for making a joke about his wife. And I would say, as far as the, who's right or wrong in that, should he have done that? Probably no, especially since it's, it's understood that he's a comedian, and this is what they do at the Oscars, is roast people and make fun of people. So this should have been an understood concept by everybody involved, or anybody that chooses to go there. And I don't want to, really say if he was wrong or right. The issue of should he have taken a joke, should have his wife taken a joke, yeah, I agree with all of that, in the context especially. But as much as I'm not, I really don't actually understand Will Smith's fame. The only performance that I thought was really good that he did was as in I Am Legend. The only every other movie that I watched, I've not been impressed. I don't think he's a great actor. And you want to talk about, which apparently during the commercial break kind of got involved, great actors. There was apparently Denzel Washington tried to step in and break it up between, because apparently during the commercial part they were still kind of going at it. He's a great actor. But Will Smith, I don't understand why everybody thinks he's such great. Anyways, I'm saying that specifically because, I'm not lifting up on a pedestal like maybe some other people, or saying that he should get away with it because he's such a great actor or whatever. But that he's human. What I want to say to people that are really criticizing, and this is what I preference this part about not thinking he's a great actor, because I want to make it clear that I'm not falling into fandom or being blinded by his prestige and stuff like that. But I'm sorry, even though I have a bias against him, he's human. Are we trying to say that, he should apologize for being human? Because if that's the case, everybody needs to apologize on this entire planet Earth. So, that's the conversation I'm not hearing. You have, just last night I watched, a couple of commentators. Let's see, it's Joe Rogan podcast clip, Ben Shapiro, Jocko, and all of them had their valid points and stuff like that. But what about the fact that just simply Will Smith is a human being, and human beings will act and react emotionally and irrationally some of the times. It's basically unavoidable. And if you're going to say it's not unavoidable, then you're basically saying what I was talking about earlier, as far as, if you're going to be in order to be a perfect human being, you always have to have your logic and your control and your frontal cortex under complete control all the times, no matter what the situation is. And I got into this tangent about this example that happened recently, but this is what bothers me so much about it. This ideology, really, or this belief system, let's just say, that we can achieve utopia, which that's always a dangerous thing. The problem with the concept of utopia is not everybody's going to agree. Why utopia will never work is because not everybody's going to agree what utopia is. That's why it never works. That's why it's dangerous. Because there'll be disagreements and fights and wars and battles about it. So the pursuit or claim that you can attain utopia is a fundamental misunderstanding of human beings in general. I don't even want to say human nature, just like human being in general, because we're talking about this right now, this concept of we have our human nature, but you have to overcome the bad parts of it. Yeah, sure, but we still are human. We still have emotions, and emotions, in my opinion, emotions is the best part of the human experience. I love to engage my intellectual and logical mind by watching hours and hours of educational stuff on YouTube or whatever. But which in itself is enjoyable, which is a human emotion. Yes, the result of it is the trigger of it is because of my logical and intellectual side of my head. But why I truly enjoy it is the emotional side. And all the range of emotions. This is why my series is mostly supposed to be a tragedy. Because personally I find that tragedies, although obviously bad, invoke basically the strongest emotions that I've ever experienced. And especially if you're talking about in the terms of fiction, of course, real tragedy that you personally experience is not fun. But in the storytelling way, whether you're telling the story yourself or hearing somebody else tell the story or watching a movie or whatever, it's a beautiful experience to go through a tragic event in a good story that makes it believable, and then you experience that pain and suffering without actually getting the real life consequences of it. So emotions, this concept of, yeah, you should, obviously, we live in a society, you have to control your emotions to a degree, but this concept of that you need to absolutely control your emotions, the ironic thing is there's kind of almost this implication that if you're not human, ironically, if you can't control your emotions. Although that's not specifically, usually it's said in terms of, like I said earlier, you're a weak person, or you're not a real man in the case of like Will Smith, or if you're a man. It's pretty crazy to me, because it's so ironic that in order for those that really believe in this idea, that if you completely can have absolute control of your emotions, that's what a real person is. No, I would say more fundamentally, yes, we have our logic and intellectual side, which has enabled us to create civilizations and technology and all that kind of stuff. But we're fundamentally emotional beings. And this is something I celebrate. I think it's a good thing, not a bad thing. And again, I say the whole span of emotions. Includes anger too, even though I'm not a fan of conflict. I don't like to get angry. Who likes to get angry? But how can you really understand peace and happiness if you don't understand and experience anger and suffering? You can't. All of it is necessary, even if it's not all good. The good can only be good with the other side in this whole yin-yang sense. I've said before, to kind of a mantra that I've been saying to a lot of people, is in the case of the yin-yang, it's pretty clear to me by now. Technically, Taoism is considered either a philosophy or has a religious aspect to it. And those might be whatever technically true, but I've come to realize that it's not just a philosophy, it's not just a religion. It's reality. This is how the world works. And the world can't work in any other way. You have to have opposing forces in order to create the experiences that we all experience through life. So yeah, it just really bothers me about all this talk about controlling emotions, and whatever, maybe in this case with Will Smith and whatever, he should have, but where's the conversation about let's not delete emotions from the human experience? Where's the understanding about that? Where's the understanding that he's a human being? Which, as I said, I have a pretty big bias against the person already, but I still understand that and accept and acknowledge that he's a human being and is going to have emotional reactions. I know people want to talk about all this. This is a man with problems because of all this, whatever the actual medical conditions of his wife, and also relationship issues apparently, and all this other kind of stuff. So everybody has issues. Everybody has hard things in life. So that's kind of irrelevant to talk about. As in, that's really the cause of his inability to control his emotions. Well, how about the fact that he's a human being and emotional outburst is part of being a human being? That there's things that practically cause it is irrelevant, because if it's not one thing, if it's not the case that whatever the case is in Will Smith's case, it will be because of another reason. So it's irrelevant to talk about, it's because he has these open relationship issues and stuff like that. So that's irrelevant. How about that just because he's a human being, he's susceptible to being a human being, which means emotional outburst, which means your logic and your control do not always win. And would you want that? If your logic and control won every time, the implication, the theory is, not only that you would never get angry, which then, once again, how do you understand what peace and happiness is? But the implication is, if emotions are completely bad, then and making this kind of concept and belief that emotions are bad, then shouldn't that be the case for happiness too? Shouldn't that be the case of sense of peace and zen? I mean, I guess people would say that, oh, no, the good emotions are fine. But then again, you come to this yin-yang issue, and literally how words are literally defined by their opposites. You can't understand one without the other. So that's the part of the conversation that I haven't seen anybody talk about yet. As far as, if I wanted to talk on behalf of Will Smith, which far be it from me to qualify for that position, but if we were just gonna hypothetically talk, if I was gonna be his representative in some defensive capability, I don't really care about the details. And either whether he should have done what he did or not. What I'm gonna say, I will make an apology for him too, but my apology will be, I'm sorry that Will Smith is human. I'm sorry that human beings are fundamentally emotional human beings. That's the problem I have with the whole talk about that. And then I guess people could say that, well, emotions could also drive a literal genocide and stuff like that. So it's not to say that emotions are, because they're such a fundamental thing, that they're justified in everything they're doing. Like I said, I wouldn't justify what Will Smith did. I'm not saying whether it's really right or wrong. I don't feel like I'm in the position to be able to judge that. Simply on this basis of this concept of all these people could call him a bad person. Okay, maybe correct. Is the implication that you've never fucked up, you've never had an emotional outburst, and so you can claim the moral high ground over Will Smith because you wouldn't do this? That part seems dishonest too, and what's going on in the conversation. So anyways, that's the part that's bothering me, that conversation about simply being a human being and the judgmental aspect of it. And ultimately, what behind all of this is this modern concept of emotional reaction is bad, and which is the same thing as these utopian ideas. And that's why, in my opinion, this kind of push for humanity to suppress all their emotions is, I would say, demonstrably bad. The utopia chase thing has kind of proven itself to be a bad idea. But, and again, just to cover this part, I understand the concept that because we're emotional beings, doesn't excuse actions, especially I could give the extreme example of the genocide, that can be driven by emotions. But in this particular case that's happening, that's everybody's talking about, we're not talking about genocide. He just slapped somebody. So how about we focus on the fact that he's a human being and reacted emotionally, which is something that we do, instead of, saying all the negative emotions are automatically bad. I don't know. In any case, I think that's all I want to say to that. But I mean, in the case of my story here and the image, this is a very critical part of the story where emotions are definitely extremely high. So in the case of in this situation, the biggest factor is their 4-year-old daughter is walking around with this gun that she found underneath their bed, which their bedroom is right here. And it's just like, of course that's gonna bring out emotions, and so that's why you have the incident where Jay slaps his wife, Haruna, and I'm definitely the kind of person where, generally speaking, I don't think you should ever hit a woman. But again, especially in the whole exact scenario here, it's kind of again, people want to simplify things and be judgmental, but if you kind of take things apart here, first of all, he's being human again, Jay Sark, and he's being emotional. Which, again, sorry for people to be emotional, but he ultimately, the reason that he slaps her is not just because he's angry and he's a emotional human being. The ironic thing, I think, is if people were quick to judge and says, well, you should never hit a woman, or slap a woman, he does it basically because he is interested in protecting women. But in this particular scenario, it's a much more vulnerable female, which is their very young daughter. That's what is motivating that. And whether you want to say it's right to actually smack or not, okay, fine, debate that. But the concept is, the idea behind it, the motivation, the emotions behind it, is sticking true to that ideal of not allowing harm to come to females. It's just, one, in this case, should be more responsible. Whereas Yuna is 23, where Deirdre is only 4 years old. And putting, if you've ever had kids, especially at the age of around, 4, when they're just starting to learn to talk, or walking around and mind very curious, of course they're going to explore everything, and then eventually she ends up looking under the bed and Deirdre fighting the gun. That she doesn't understand that was a possibility. Again, she's human too, not perfect, but in the same way that you can use that as an excuse for her not being perfect, I say you would have to also excuse the incident with Jace slaps her, because he's human in reacting, but then ultimately it's in service of, actually, and protection of this ideal of protecting females, particularly as a male. This is something basically we can't avoid feeling. It's DNA programming. So I guess one point about this little bit of rant that I just went into is that, it's something that's always bothered me, and kind of one of the main points of the Conquer the Sun series is it's really easy for people to judge in a very simplified and expedient fashion. And I understand that too, because not everybody wants to or can spend the time to break things down. But in those cases, so I have that understanding, but what I would say is, well, if you're not willing to spend the time, I'm not expecting people to spend the time, but if you're not willing to spend the time to properly analyze the situation, then hold your tongue. Spend your judgment until you are ready to spend time, instead of just, judging people without the proper context, without the proper knowledge, without properly deeply analyzing the situation and all the nuances to it. So that's the issue. One of the biggest issues I have with just as far as I'm concerned, I think is a possible saying that if more people work towards deferring that quick snap judgments, maybe the world would be a better place. I believe strongly that to be the case. I think a lot of people would agree on that too. And it's not such a radical thing. And it's not the case where I would expect everybody to not be judgmental at sometimes with quick snap judgmental decisions. And to some degree, judgment is an emotion, but I almost feel like it's more of an instinctual thing. Which is why you partly can't blame it, but all I would say is, yeah, you have it's part of your human nature or whatever, but that doesn't mean you actually have to express your judgment. So that's the kind of issue I have as far as the judgment thing goes. In any case, so in this situation, yeah, I mean, if I'm talking just about me personally in this situation, and even though I'm the author that write it, although ultimately it's a fictional story, so they're not real people getting hurt, but the situation where Jay slaps, I don't know, I don't like that, but again, and as a general rule, yeah, I'm not for that, but as I kind of broke down, things aren't always that simple there, and the thing that people want to purport that the concept that they believe in, and not having men hurt a woman or the female gender, then if you break the situation down, that's actually why he slaps her. Because he believes so strongly. It's such a strong belief that his emotions come out so strongly that his logical and controlled mind aren't able to control the situation. In other words, aka, he is so passionate about it. His passion is so strong, which passion, I would say, expresses... passion's not necessarily... Obviously, you can point to times in history. It's not always correct. But passion is an expression of a very strong belief and conviction. You can't have high levels of passions if you don't strongly feel and believe and are convinced on what you are trying to accomplish in whatever instance the passion is manifesting itself. So yeah, it's actually because of this violent act of him slapping Haruna is a demonstration, ironically, about his extreme passion, the level of his passion, to the point where, okay, maybe we can all agree that your mind, your logical mind should reign supreme at all times. But again, because he's human, and because his passion is so high, and thus his conviction and belief in this concept of not allowing danger, or just in the general sense of danger, let alone actually hitting, or I guess in a more general sense, allowing injury and hurt to happen to a female. That's what's behind this exact scenario. And I would say, I mean, granted it's me, the author, writing it, but I would say I generally try to basically, for me, it's really easy to do character introductions, because I basically just take the original character as the character popped into my head, which I talked a lot about how not only does their kind of visual representation, but like their entire personality just pops into my head. And so whenever I have to think about what a character does in a situation in a story, I just have to kind of pretend to be that character in that situation, given their personality, and it's actually very easy. And I would say that in Haruna's case, Haruna here, it's understandable. She probably, maybe not even to a conscious level, but she probably actually feels like maybe, well, she doesn't really say anything about being slapped, so she's not really in protest. And again, yeah, I'm writing it, but I always feel like I'm being, at least as much as possible, true to the character's personality. As if they were, I always try to, like, how can you make a really good story unless your characters are as human as they possibly could be, as realistic as they possibly could be? The more realistic, the more human your characters are, the more believable, the more relatable they are. If you have the opposite case, the story's just not going to keep people's interest. So I think this is a very important aspect of making characters as real humans would act and think, including with their imperfections, because this is a key part of being human. There's that term in writing and storytelling that the character's perfect. They're Mary Stu or Gary Stu. And that's basically universally considered not good storytelling. So the opposite of that is a character that's actually representative of real people. And that's what I I don't even necessarily consciously strive for that. It just seems to be how I think about things, how it is for the writing process for me, and how these ideas kind of pop into my head. So, even in these visual representations, especially if you don't have the actual context as I'm explaining, but, I guess it's very understandable how you can make a quick judgment of the scene where Jace is stopping. I don't know, but it's a little bit more complex than that. And in the case of these images, I've done a lot of images on stories that are not published, but in this case, anybody has access to the full story because Conqueror of the Sun, The Cursed Princess is published, and so anybody can get the entire context of the story, not just on this particular scenario, but the entire novel's context, and then beyond that, there's the actual entire saga of the Conqueror of the Sun series, because The Cursed Princess is actually just a side book. So there's a lot of context even for the single novel itself, and a lot of history, a lot of foundation, a lot of background as far as that goes. But I think for now, that's all I want to say about all these things beeping at me. That's all I want to say about talking about these subjects that I wanted to talk about in this recording. So for right now, I might continue another recording later, but for right now, I'm going to say end of line.